We're entering an era in which AI is becoming more ingrained with our lives in all aspects, and we're focusing on the healthcare industry today. How exactly is the healthcare industry integrating AI, and how will the future of healthcare look like? We're talking to a company whose mission is to integrate AI to prevent early diseases from occurring and use this in part of their preventative care. We're talking to Alexander Dobranowski. He is the CEO of HealWell. And we'll be talking about not just his company, but the broad landscape of healthcare and what the healthcare future is going to look like. Welcome to the show, Alex. Good to see you.
Thank you very much, David. It's a privilege to be here and, of course, be a voice to your audience.
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier in the introduction, your mission is to improve healthcare and save lives, really, through identification, preventative measures, integrating AI. So before we talk about exactly how you're doing this, tell us about the healthcare landscape right now. What are some of the, I guess, biggest problems that the healthcare industry is facing all around the world? And how can these problems be solved by AI? Two-part question.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no problem. And David, I think I can lend a fairly unique perspective. I'm a medical doctor by training and also an entrepreneur and technologist focused on some of these fairly compelling tools, right at the pointy end of innovation, machine learning tools, artificial intelligence tools, and of course, data science tools. And look, I'll start with one quick comment, David. So the horizon to innovation, the timeline horizon to innovation in healthcare went from literally years to decades to now accelerated to months to weeks. And that's major, right? Because the healthcare industry at large has been one of the most lumbering, right, regulated, overly regulated, cumbersome industries. So it just took an astronomical amount of time and effort, right, for innovation to move forward. But since the pandemic and that acceleration of digital tools and digital care, that really changed the perspective of all the stakeholders, patients, providers, physicians, insurers even, right, to adopt technology and harness aspects of technology in a much quicker way. I'll touch on some critical challenges. So, in healthcare, in Canada in particular, and in the US, is effectively in crisis. And you hear this term, thrown around pretty loosely. But what we mean by that is you have this massive amount of healthcare demand that's unmet need. And what's happening is patients are waiting to see their physicians, to see their primary care doctors, to see their specialists, to get their diagnostics done. And during that time that they're waiting, unfortunately, some of the diseases that they have are maturing and unfortunately maturing to a point where it materially impacts their outcome, lifestyle, and even their survival. So there's just this big problem where we believe harnessing certain technologies, right, today, validated today, can really help solve that problem. And it provides value for all these stakeholders. So number one, for the patient, right? You catch a disease earlier, you really then can improve their trajectory from a health perspective. You save tons of cost to the healthcare system. And of course, you support overworked providers with these tools so they can be more productive, spending less time on paperwork and more time actually reviewing patients.
Okay, let's back up for a minute. So I'm reading a paragraph from one of the analyst reports that you sent me. It says here 300 million people worldwide, 1 in 12 Canadians, are currently living with a rare disorder that often goes undiagnosed due to the complexity of the diagnostic criteria. It can take an average of 4 years for a rare condition to be recognized, putting patients at serious risk of missing the opportunity to intercept disease progression in its early stages. Now, tell us, Alex, you've had medical training. That was your background. As a medical professional, how would you utilize AI to shorten the time span it would take to, I guess, detect this rare disorder, whatever it may
Sure.
be?
So we've stood up technology that can find patients that are at high risk of rare diseases, ultra rare, complex, and chronic conditions. So to answer your question more pointedly, how best can we harness artificial intelligence technologies today in healthcare? Well, number one, the biggest problem we face in healthcare is that we've generated all this data, but it's siloed. And a large amount of healthcare data or clinical data that's generated is unstructured. So where our technology works and shines today is taking structured and unstructured clinical text and improving its quality. So then you can run these sophisticated queries, you can run algorithms against this data to then find those patients that are at high risk of these rare or ultra rare conditions. So I think that is the most important area where AI can play in healthcare today.
Okay, so just part of my ignorance because I have no medical training whatsoever, but it says here 300 million people worldwide are currently living with a rare disorder. I'm guessing they've already been diagnosed, right? I think that's the assumption here, and it takes a long time for them to recognize. So, can we make the assumption that there's a lot more people than 300 million worldwide that may or may not have a rare or special condition that has not yet been diagnosed?
Yeah, that's correct. So just to give you an idea of the actual burden, every 1 in 9 or 1 in 12 Canadians, 1 in 10 Americans has a rare, ultra rare, or complex condition. And they're walking around for years not having the appropriate diagnosis made and are not on the appropriate care pathway. So what our technology can do is help identify these patients, right? Get them on the right diagnostic path, and then of course on the right care pathway much sooner.
Can you give us an example of such a rare condition that would take a while to diagnose?
Yeah, so there's a whole host. There's actually thousands of rare
Right.
conditions
Okay.
that fit in this criteria, but I can give you a number of examples like Fabry's disease or Gaucher's disease. These are conditions that are in 1 in every 200,000 patients, right? That has these conditions, and for the most part, right, people aren't diagnosed until years too late.
Why is it that doctors, using the tools that they have today, are taking so long to diagnose a patient with a rare disease?
Well, good question, David. There's quite a bit to unpack there. So it's less about the physician's clinical acumen, right, or their clinical capability. It's more about the fact that doctors at large, right, specialists and primary care physicians are actually quite overburdened and more with administrative functions and tasks than actual clinical tasks. So they can't be everywhere and for every one of their patients at the same time, right? And thus patients, just de facto fall through the cracks. It's a big problem.
Okay, so it's an issue of not handling the volume of patients.
That's
That's
right.
really what it comes down to.
Yes.
Okay. Well, it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the hospital of the future is really just what we have now, except with robots who can handle more patients. And so, uh, well, walk us through what that future may look like. I'm just
Sure.
speculating here.
Yeah, and so I think we're working on that future today. And instead of having, robots seeing more patients, what we're seeing are these smart tools, right? These advanced clinical decision support tools that can help actually work in the background when the physician is seeing patients and provide them with suggestions and real clinical support. And that's how our technology works today. So these technologies will continue to evolve, right? Where effectively these tools will be triaging patients, helping with diagnostics, right? And flagging those patients with unmet needs at a much more rapid clip than someone can do or a physician can do manually today.
Okay, I guess that's where your company comes in. So, I want to come back to the industry in just a bit, but since we're talking about solutions, how exactly does your company work? Like, I mean, let's say I may or may not have a rare condition. I don't know, right? So, what's my next step here? Do I go to a doctor? Do I go to a clinic? Do I get a checkup? Do I use your technology in some way? Basically, do you directly work with patients, or do you partner with the physicians? Do you partner with medical institutions, hospitals? How do you work?
Yeah, so very good question, David. And it's a little bit of a mix, all of the above. So the company I run, which is called HealWell AI, is a company that is a technology company focused on preventative care using technology such as artificial intelligence. And we partner with hospital systems, other provider groups, and our main strategic partner is a company called Well Health Technologies, which has over 167 clinics in Canada and sees about 2 million patients per quarter. So that's a lot of patient encounters. And we work with this partnership system to then be able to unlock clinical insights within that whole infrastructure of providers, patients, and data that they have. So that's how we work. That's the context. So we don't work directly with patients. We work with our partner provider systems, either hospital systems or clinical groups such as Well Health Technologies.
Okay, tell us more about some of these partners that you have.
Yeah, so the cornerstone partnership is with Well Health, which is the largest clinical group in Canada and has a very large presence in the US. We also have partnerships in place with 11 hospital systems, very large ones in Canada, and we also have partnership with 2 in the US. So we're also commercially active in the US, not just a Canadian-oriented healthcare AI company.
I'm just curious to understanding the technology a little bit more. So walk us through exactly how the AI component kicks in. So I suppose you work with your partners, you gather data with a lot of patients. Presumably there's a computer program that scrubs through the data. I mean, it sounds to me like it's just a very powerful computer that's able to sift through a lot of big data sets very quickly. But where does the AI aspect come in?
Sure. So I'll start with the kind of simplistic view, and I touched on this a little bit, but our data engine is able to take data from all sorts of discrete data sources in healthcare, whether it's software that physicians use, which are called electronic medical record software systems, or lab results, or imaging results. We're able to take all this data and ingest it effectively into a singular data lake. Where our AI technology works is once this data is ingested, is to structure it all into a format that then you can run algorithms against. And it's that restructuring which is very tricky, right? Because you can look at the multitude of different specialties, of different modalities, and taking all that data, right, and then making it into a form where we can then make sense of it. That's where the artificial intelligence in our technology really shines. And then we have an entire algorithmic development process. And that's now important for finding patients for specific separate diseases in different therapeutic domains. So there's kind of 2 areas where our company's focused on from an artificial intelligence perspective.
Okay, and right now, are you mainly focused on U.S. patients, markets, worldwide, other markets?
Yeah, so we're most active, David, right now in Canada. That's where we have our largest presence. But we do also have partnerships with multiple hospital systems and community clinic networks in the US. So we're North America focused at the moment, but we're also looking at other jurisdictions.
Right. Um, I suppose this technology could also be applied to clinical trials, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay. Walk us through the phases of a clinical trial and explain to the audience like we're 5 years old, people who haven't studied medicine, and how clinical trials could benefit from advanced AI.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're asking two separate questions, and I'll touch on them. But effectively, right, to safely develop a therapeutic, it has to go through different phases. And usually there's 4 full phases that a new therapy, sorry, has to go through before you can essentially have it go out in the wild and be prescribed widely and safely to patients that require that therapy. And where we focus is in finding patients that have a really strong eligibility for those community safety-based trials, those phase 2 to 4 clinical trials, right? So you're asking the question, well, where can artificial intelligence enhance this entire spectrum of clinical trial workflow? Well, one area is finding patients, and that's where we work. Other areas are in how best to design and architect a clinical trial, right, to improve outcomes and the success of those trials. And another area is to accelerate the time between those phases of trials, right? Because this is usually a 10 to 15 year time horizon as you're developing a new therapy, right, and trying to show that it's safe and effective for use. So it's accelerating that where there's a lot of value. But to do that, you also have to be able to find patients. So finding patients is where our technology works best.
Are you ever concerned about the machines making poor judgment or in this particular case, being integrated into a trial for a therapy, producing results that may contradict human judgment.
Yeah, and David, you're touching on a very important point, right? So none of the technologies that we've been discussing, right, can effectively be used without them being validated from a safety perspective, and a compliance perspective, a privacy compliance perspective. So those steps all need to be taken. And I'll give you an example. So one of the companies that we recently acquired, a company called Pentavere, they've been in a position to publish the effectiveness of their artificial intelligence technologies in some of the highest impact factor medical journals that exist. So, and they've successfully published, I believe, between 20 to 25 manuscripts. And that takes a lot of time, rigor, and feasibility to do. Only once you've built that evidence that, hey, this technology works, that it's safe, can you then go and start using it in a more delicate setting with stakeholders, right?
Well, yeah, I think that's maybe a question that some people watching this may have, is that AI is a relatively new trend. I mean, it's not a new technology by any means. We've had various forms of AI for the last couple of decades, but it's recently been attracting more media attention. It's recently been integrated into industries a lot more. How safe really is this technology? How much testing has been done? How much data has been gathered to prove that the results are safe, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, and so David, it's very early days, especially in artificial intelligence in healthcare. But we're just now starting to see over the last couple of years a lot of exciting companies that have developed these technologies, right? Showing this evidence. They've been able to publish and say, hey, this technology works and it's safe. Let's move into the next phase of innovation here, right? Actually applying it into clinical scenarios. So to answer your question, very early days, but that evidence is growing, and there's a very, very particular emphasis around safety in the regulatory framework and authorities that govern over AI in healthcare.
Okay. I'll read you another paragraph from the same report. According to Harvard School of Public Health, using AI to make diagnoses could potentially reduce treatment costs by up to 50% and improve health outcomes by 40%. In another instance, a study from the University of Hawaii found that AI was able to distinguish between the mammograms of women who were more likely to develop breast cancer later on and those who were not. Now, again, I'm not a medical professional, but it sounds to me like that last sentence indicates that potentially some computer programs, AI in this case, have been more accurate or could potentially be more accurate in general than a human making the same diagnostic.
Yeah.
We're running the same sets of diagnostics. This is not an issue with volume. It's not an issue of the computer being able to see more patients. It's just more accurate. Is that statement true?
It is true. And we're starting to see now, David, examples where these types of technologies are a magnitude or even two magnitudes safer than the human clinician. So we're talking about a transformational shift that's happening right in healthcare, and the time horizon is accelerating. I think everyone was really surprised at just how fast generative AI has been moving towards, of course, this ultimate aim of AGI, and we're seeing that same type of pace accelerated in healthcare, albeit it's just in an earlier phase of maturity of these types of technologies, right?
So can you just again explain in layman terms, using this specific example, how is it that I know you weren't part of the study, but maybe just help us speculate. How is it that this particular AI was a lot more accurate in distinguishing between the mammograms of women who have breast cancer or do not? Right? I mean, what could the
Yeah.
computer be doing that the human is perhaps missing or making a mistake on?
Well, what you're touching on is the radiological analysis, right, of lymph nodes, and that can be tricky. So essentially, this technology is really good at finding those very subtle findings on medical imaging that the human eye can just simply miss. Like, let me give you an example, right? You're a radiologist that's exhausted. You've been working through the night on call. You're going through a divorce. You're looking at, your 50th set of images that night, and you miss things, right? So this is just highlighting that, okay, there is technology here today that's safe, that isn't missing these things.
Okay. So it's really just eliminating human error is what this
Yes.
is about. Okay.
Yes.
Can you potentially see a scenario in which some roles in the medical profession could be phased out in the future in favor of machines and AI taking over precisely because of the fact that they're more accurate, they're not prone to fatigue, they're not prone to human error?
I think we'll see roles and responsibilities change. There may not necessarily be like a phase out exodus, but I think that there'll be a lot of enhancement of someone's clinical workflow with these types of tools that'll ultimately make the physician far more productive and far safer, right? So that's where I believe it's genuinely heading, David, as opposed to, look, this technology is here today, and those skills by these clinicians are just totally, useless now.
All right, let's talk a little bit more about your company and we'll close off there. So tell us
Sure.
about, you talked to us about how it works, about your partners. Tell us about the history, the founding of it. Well, first of all, let's back up and talk about you for a minute. So you've had a background in medicine. I believe you've actually worked as a radiologist in Australia, if I'm correct. At what point did you decide to transition into tech and then eventually, um, work at HealWell?
Yes, and this will kind of tie to one of your previous questions. So I started my training as a radiologist, and at that time I was able to witness, some of these incredible advancements in technologies, and I was inspired to leave clinical practice and focus on that intersection of technology and healthcare. And also inspired by the fact that, as a physician, right, you can only see so many patients per day. But if you build, validate, and scale technology, you can touch lives in the millions, right, per day effectively if deployed right. And that brings me to the debut of HealWell, right? We debuted as a senior listed company on the TSX on October 1, 2023. So effectively 19 weeks ago from today. And we've had some very, very compelling momentum. And really a lot of that is due to the fact that we're partnered with one of the largest healthcare companies in Canada, as I mentioned, Well Health Technologies, that sees about 2 million patients per quarter. And I'm mentioning that, David, because the technology we develop at HealWell, right, we're able to deploy it compliantly into this Well Health ecosystem and actually make a difference in these millions of patient visits. So it's really exciting. And our main objective as a healthcare-oriented AI company is not to just keep developing these technologies, but also to acquire them. So we're a company that's focused, it was a high growth focus from an M&A perspective. Since we debuted October 1, we successfully did 3 financings. So we raised 29.5 million in terms of new capital. We have no bank debt, and we were able to do 2 acquisitions up to this time. And I'm very excited to share, right, that our pipeline ahead of both artificial intelligence companies and healthcare software companies, right, we're just getting started on. So it'll be a very interesting year for HealWell, and we're expecting some very high growth.
How are you planning to scale this technology so that you reach many, many people around the world, not just sectors in Canada?
Yeah, another great question. So right now, as I mentioned, we have very strong growth vectors into Well Health in Canada and to partners in the US. We also made an investment in a company called Doctorly in Germany, which is our first foray into the EU market, opening up a very important demographic and healthcare presence right in Europe. So we do have a plan, David, to grow into other jurisdictions. And a company that we just recently acquired called IntraHealth, I think we announced earlier in February, they also have a presence in multiple jurisdictions in New Zealand, Australia, and Canada. So our presence already today, right, is starting to go beyond just the Canadian borders.
Okay. If your investors would ask you how you would add shareholder value in the medium to long term, on top of what you said already, what other goals do you have?
Yeah, so number one, our primary goal, right, is to action on this capital allocation strategy. And we believe the landscape right now in healthcare, AI, and data science is ripe for that. So that's number one, and I think I touched on that. And number two is to deploy this technology at such a scale where we support and add value for all our stakeholders, our patients, our providers, right, our partner providers, and of course, our commercial partners in life sciences.
Interesting. And how do we stay up to date with your company?
Well, you guys, you can follow us directly from our website. Every press release is updated there. We're also active on social media, right? And we're out there right now. So we're talking to a lot of different audiences, talking to a lot of stakeholders, right? So there's a number of ways you can engage with us.
I'll just leave you or the audience on this final question. Ultimately, how will people's lives change with the advent of AI and how AI is currently being integrated with healthcare technologies?
Look, I think already we're seeing patient lives being improved by artificial intelligence technologies. And I'll add that, right? You know, I've seen deployed now AI scribe tools, which as the physician is speaking to the patient, it's capturing all of that conversation, right? So they're not sitting there typing away, all the way to improving when a patient is scheduled, right? These tools are already deployed. So the speed of the patient to see a physician is starting to materially change. And then, of course, on where we're focused on, right, which is the diagnostic part of the journey for the patient, right? Less patients are going to fall through the cracks. That's something that we have a clear line of sight on, and the technology to support and validate that claim. And that's pretty exciting.
But before we go, I have to ask you to comment on this. I'm a big lover of sci-fi movies. I've seen as many as I could count. Have you ever seen this movie it's called Elysium? Came out, I don't know, 10 years ago. Matt Damon was in it. Anyway, there's a scene at the end where they go to space and there's a space station for wealthy people, and there's this machine, this medical device where you go in and it basically scans you and it detects any anomalies, any injury it could fix, any disease it could cure, any cancer it could remove. Obviously, this is a sci-fi movie, but are we heading in that direction? How far away from reality is such a device?
So, David, I've seen Elysium. I think we're probably closer to that reality than we're aware of. I'd say in the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to have systems that'll be able to do kind of those body-wide primary survey diagnostics.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time, Alex. We'll put the links to your company and we'll follow you there. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.